There's a discussion on Wednesday night recently to where we had an individual who thought that when you died, that there was no punishment, there was no torment, that you just ceased to be. Well, in this particular verse, reading right there, the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet were. If we go back to chapter 19, we see that just before the last feast of the birds, that the Antichrist and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire right away. No passing go, no collecting $200. You're there. Well, here it is 1,000 years later. Satan is now bound and thrown into the lake of fire. And guess who's already there? So they did not just cease to be. They have already 1,000 years of roasting and torment ahead of Satan. So if anybody says that when you die you cease to be, this is pretty cut and dry. You see the first inhabitants of the lake of fire are still there when the third inhabitant arrives. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, whose presence the earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. Now I look at that and I'm thinking, what is significant about heaven and earth fleeing from the presence of God? He created it, right? Why would they flee from him? Well, heaven and earth, and later, death and Hades, are the last vestiges of the fallen creation. Heaven and earth fled away because their corruption in the presence of the holy God could not be tolerated. Other verses mention that heaven and earth are cleansed and purged with fire. Whether that means that they are cast into the lake of fire or whether or not they are just purged to be used again, recycled, repurposed for the new heaven and earth, I don't know. But heaven and earth cannot abide the presence of God, the Holy One. Verse 12, and I saw the dead great and small standing before the throne. The books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their deeds. And the sea gave up their dead which was in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. As I said, the last vestiges of corruption of Adam's sin are being dispatched. It's interesting to note that death is dealt with. I mean, Hades, sure. Hades is now empty. The souls that were there have been brought before the great white throne. Abraham's bosom was empty, so now Hades is empty. So there is no more purpose for it. Get rid of it. Don't need it. It was a temporary holding place anyway. But death? What is the significance of death being thrown into the lake of fire? And I had to stop and puzzle on that for a bit. Then it hit me. Complete the sentence. The wages of sin is death. Death is what came about from Adam's original sin. God had to provide a pelt for Adam and Eve to replace the fig leaves that they had sewn together. So an animal died. Death was introduced. It is the probably greatest, I'm not going to stand on which is the greatest, but is probably the greatest repercussion of Adam's sin is death. Sin equals death. Sin is being dealt with. Death is no longer needed. Like Hades, it's cast into the lake of fire.